The night was supposed to be a celebration. The city skyline glittered like diamonds under the velvet night, and a sleek black limousine rolled out of the Grand Hotel. Inside, Isabella Carter, one of the richest and most powerful CEOs in the country, leaned back against the leather seat, her hand gently resting on her stomach. She was pregnant, glowing with the kind of happiness money could never buy. For years she had built an empire, a fortress of success, but what she wanted most was a family. Tonight she believed she had it all, but outside that tinted glass, her world was already unraveling. As the limousine glided through the empty streets, Isabella's thoughts drifted to her husband, Richard. He was supposed to join her after the gala. He had whispered sweet promises, brushed his lips against her cheek, and told her he loved her. She wanted to believe him, wanted to think that his love was real, that he cherished not just her power and wealth, but the woman she truly was. Then came the smell. At first it was faint, a sharp tang of gasoline that didn't belong in a luxury car. Isabella frowned, shifting in her seat. "Driver," she called out, but the divider was up. No answer. The engine roared louder, the car accelerating when it should have slowed. And then, boom, a sudden explosion shook the limousine, flames bursting from the hood, licking the sides of the car like hungry beasts. Smoke poured into the cabin, thick and suffocating. Isabella coughed violently, panic clawing up her throat. She tried the doors, they wouldn't budge. She slammed her fists against the glass, screaming for help, but the city street was empty. Inside that inferno, the CEO who had everything was reduced to a terrified woman, trapped, clutching the life inside her belly, begging for a miracle. Her mind raced back to every cold decision she had ever made, every loyal employee she had fired without a second thought. One face stood out: David Miller, a hard-working manager she had dismissed just weeks ago. He had walked out of her office with his little daughter's picture clutched in his hand, his eyes full of quiet pain. She had never thought of him again, until now. The fire grew hotter, blistering her skin, her vision blurred. She screamed, pounding the glass with every ounce of strength left in her. "Please! Someone, help me!" And then, through the haze of smoke, she saw a shadow. A man running, his coat discarded, his face determined. The car door rattled as strong hands pulled at it, kicked at it, fought against the flames. Her eyes widened as the smoke cleared just enough for her to recognize him. David. The man she had cast aside. The man with nothing left to lose. And now, he was the only thing standing between her and certain death. Before the fire, before the betrayal, Isabella Carter was a name that demanded respect. In the glittering world of business, she wasn't just a participant. She was a queen. Born into an ordinary family with no wealth, she clawed her way up through grit, discipline, and an iron will that never bent. By the age of 30, she had already built one of the largest real estate and investment empires in the country. She was the kind of woman who walked into a boardroom and made seasoned men twice her age fall silent. Her employees described her as cold, calculating, and impossible to please. They weren't wrong. She demanded perfection, and she didn't hesitate to cut off anyone who failed her standards. To Isabella, loyalty wasn't something you gave, it was something you proved. Her world was built on contracts, numbers, and results. But behind the power suits, the designer heels, and the icy eyes that intimidated even the boldest rivals, there was another side of her. A side that few ever saw. Isabella longed for warmth. She longed for a home filled with laughter, for a man who would hold her not because of her bank account, but because of her heart. She had built towers of glass and steel, yet her soul lived in an empty room. When Richard Carter came into her life, she thought she had finally found what she was searching for. Richard was handsome, charming, and attentive in ways that disarmed her. He made her laugh, something she hadn't done in years. He opened doors for her, pulled out her chair at dinners, whispered promises of a future filled with love. Slowly, he melted the armor she had built around herself. Against all logic, Isabella allowed herself to be vulnerable. She gave him her trust, her name, and eventually her empire. The board had raised eyebrows when she married him. Some whispered that Richard was nothing more than an opportunist, a man intoxicated by her wealth and power. But Isabella silenced them with her conviction. She wanted to believe love could conquer doubt, and when she discovered she was pregnant, she believed all her sacrifices had been worth it. For the first time in her life, Isabella felt complete. She imagined a nursery painted in soft colors, lullabies echoing through the halls of her vast mansion, tiny hands clutching hers as she whispered bedtime stories. She pictured Richard by her side, proud and protective, the perfect husband and father. What she didn't know was that while she dreamed of family, Richard was plotting her downfall. But on that night, as the limousine carried her away from the gala, Isabella wasn't thinking of betrayal. She was thinking of the life inside her, the child she already loved more than her fortune. She was thinking of the happiness she thought was finally hers. And she had no idea that her fairy tale was about to turn into a nightmare. Richard Carter was everything Isabella thought she wanted in a man. Tall, confident, with a smile that could disarm anyone in the room. To the outside world, he appeared to be the perfect husband. Well-dressed, polite, always standing a step behind his powerful wife, ready to play the role of the supportive partner. People envied Isabella, thinking she had managed to find not only success in business, but also love in marriage. But Richard had mastered the art of performance. What others saw as charm was nothing more than manipulation, carefully crafted to get him closer to what he wanted most: power. Behind closed doors, Richard was a different man. He was restless, bitter, and consumed by envy. He hated being introduced as Isabella Carter's husband. Every time he saw her name on the cover of a magazine, every time he watched her command a room full of powerful investors, something dark twisted inside him. He wanted the spotlight for himself. He wanted to be the one people admired, the one people feared, the one people bowed to. The truth was, Richard had married Isabella for her empire. From the beginning, her wealth, influence, and reputation were the glittering prizes he had his eyes on. Love was just a mask he wore, a mask that Isabella desperately wanted to believe was real. And while Isabella dreamed of family, Richard sought out someone else, Melissa, a young socialite with ambition as sharp as his own. Melissa wasn't naive. She knew Richard was married, but she saw in him a ticket to the life she craved. Together, they whispered plans in dimly lit hotel rooms, their laughter laced with cruelty. "You'll never be more than her shadow as long as she's alive," Melissa teased one night, her lips brushing Richard's ear. "Unless you do something about it." That seed of thought grew quickly inside him. Why should Isabella have everything? Wealth, reputation, and now even a child, while he lived as her accessory. The child in her womb only made things worse. It meant she was more powerful than ever, and he was pushed further into the background. Richard began to see Isabella not as a partner, but as an obstacle standing between him and the life he believed he deserved. He imagined the headlines after her tragic accident: "Beloved CEO gone too soon." He pictured himself stepping into her place, grieving widower turned business leader, the world's sympathy paving his way to the top. In public, Richard kissed Isabella's cheek and placed his hand on her belly as if he cared. In private, he sketched out her end like a ruthless businessman planning a deal. His eyes, once warm and adoring, now burned with calculation. To Isabella, he remained the charming husband. To Melissa, he was the man destined to inherit an empire. But to himself, Richard was already something else entirely. He was a predator circling his prey, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. While Isabella and Richard lived in penthouses and attended glittering galas, David Miller's life was carved out in quieter, harsher tones. A widower in his mid-30s, David had once been a respected manager at Carter Enterprises. He was known for his work ethic, his integrity, and his steady leadership. But none of that had mattered the day Isabella Carter herself had called him into her office and coldly told him he was no longer needed. It wasn't personal. To Isabella, it was just business. Numbers hadn't lined up, projections had dipped, and someone had to take the fall. David had pleaded his case, explaining the circumstances, even showing her the photo of his daughter Lily, taped inside his worn leather wallet. But Isabella, with her icy gaze and flawless composure, dismissed him in minutes. "I need results, not excuses," she had said. Those words burned into him, a scar deeper than the loss of a paycheck. After that day, David's world grew heavier. He worked whatever odd jobs he could find, from driving delivery vans to fixing cars in a friend's garage. His only constant was Lily, a bright-eyed 7-year-old who carried his late wife's smile. She was his anchor, his reason to keep moving even when the world seemed determined to grind him down. David never spoke ill of Isabella to his daughter, though. He didn't want bitterness poisoning Lily's innocence. Instead, when Lily asked why he didn't wear his suit and tie anymore, he simply told her that Daddy was trying something new. Inside, though, he wrestled with feelings of failure and humiliation. Still, David was not the kind of man to drown in self-pity. Each morning he packed Lily's lunch, braided her hair clumsily, and walked her to school before hustling to his next job. People who knew him said he carried himself with quiet dignity, the kind of strength that didn't need to shout. And yet fate has a way of weaving lives together in the most unexpected ways. On the night of Isabella's supposed accident, David was nearby, having just finished a late shift driving a temporary route. He was bone-tired, his clothes smelling faintly of gasoline, when he noticed the glow of flames ahead. At first, he thought it was a car stalled in the street, but as he drew closer, he saw the limousine engulfed in fire, and a woman trapped inside, pounding on the glass with desperate, fading strength. He didn't hesitate. He didn't think of the risks or of the woman who had once ruined his career. He only saw a human being fighting for her life. And in that split second, David made a choice. The same hands that once typed reports and signed contracts now tore furiously at the car door. The same man Isabella had dismissed without a second thought was now the one fighting against the inferno to save her. And in that moment, their fates became forever entwined. For Isabella, the news came like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She was pregnant. After years of pouring herself into contracts, mergers, and late nights in glass towers, she finally held something far more precious than money or power. She was carrying life inside her. The moment the doctor confirmed it, her eyes welled with tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed in years. For once, she wasn't thinking of quarterly earnings or stock prices. She was thinking of lullabies, little shoes lined up by the door, and soft cries echoing in the halls of her mansion. She returned home glowing, clutching the sonogram photo like it was a priceless diamond. Richard was in his study, sipping whiskey, scrolling through his phone. Isabella walked in with a smile that lit up the room. "Richard," she whispered, her voice trembling with excitement, "we're going to have a baby." He looked up, his expression unreadable. For a brief moment, he managed a smile, a weak imitation of joy. He kissed her forehead, muttered something about being happy for her, and poured another glass of whiskey. But inside, Richard's stomach twisted with rage. A baby was not part of his plan. To Isabella, the child was a blessing. To Richard, it was a chain. With a baby in the picture, Isabella's power in the company would only grow stronger. The board would adore her image as a mother and business leader. Investors would rally behind her. She would be untouchable. And Richard? He would remain the accessory, the man in her shadow. At night, Isabella caressed her belly, whispering dreams about their future family. She painted pictures of playrooms and family vacations, of Richard teaching their child to ride a bike. She believed she had finally unlocked the life she always wanted. Love, family, and success blending into a perfect whole. But when Isabella drifted to sleep, Richard sat awake, staring into the darkness. In his mind, the baby was not a gift, it was a threat. He thought of Melissa, waiting in her silk sheets, reminding him that he deserved more, that he could have it all if Isabella wasn't in the way. Her voice echoed in his head like a poison-laced lullaby. "Once she's gone," Melissa whispered in memory, "everything is yours. The money, the company, freedom, and me." Richard began to drink more heavily, each glass of whiskey fueling his resentment. He put on a performance during the day, placing his hand gently on Isabella's stomach when others were watching, smiling for the cameras. Behind the facade, he seethed with jealousy, hatred, and an obsession with control. Isabella never noticed. She was too busy dreaming of a nursery and planning names. She believed her husband was simply overwhelmed, adjusting to the idea of fatherhood. She mistook his silence for nerves, his distance for shock. What she didn't realize was that while she dreamed of rocking her baby in her arms, Richard was already imagining how to turn her joy into ashes. And soon he would take the first step toward her destruction. Melissa Sinclair had always been drawn to power. With her flawless beauty and sharp tongue, she knew how to climb social ladders, using charm as her weapon. When she first met Richard Carter at a private club, she recognized him immediately, not for his own achievements, but for the woman standing beside him. Everyone knew Isabella Carter, the untouchable CEO. Melissa saw Richard as her doorway into that world, and Richard saw Melissa as his mirror, ambitious, selfish, and hungry. Their affair began quickly, fueled by secrecy and adrenaline. In hotel suites and dimly lit bars, they laughed at Isabella behind her back. Melissa mocked her elegance, her cold demeanor, her reputation for being the perfect woman. Richard drank it in, finding comfort in Melissa's cruel validation. Together, they convinced themselves they were the real victors, while Isabella was nothing more than an obstacle to their happiness. But Melissa wanted more than stolen nights. She wanted the empire, and she pushed Richard to think bigger. "You'll never be free as long as she's alive," Melissa murmured one evening, her fingers tracing circles on Richard's chest. "Don't you see? Everything you want is locked behind her name. But accidents happen. Cars crash, fires start, people grieve and move on. And then you, my love, step forward as the grieving widower who inherits it all." The idea slithered into Richard's mind like venom. At first, he resisted, but Melissa knew exactly how to manipulate him. She whispered promises of the life they could build together. Mansions, yachts, freedom from Isabella's shadow. Slowly, Richard's hesitation crumbled, replaced by a dangerous determination. They began to plot. Richard used his connections to discreetly pay a mechanic to tamper with Isabella's limousine, making it a death trap waiting to ignite. Melissa arranged alibis, suggesting restaurants they could be seen at, parties they should attend, so no suspicion would ever fall on them. Richard rehearsed his role in front of mirrors. The devastated husband, clutching reporters' hands, tears streaming down his face. He practiced lines of grief, lines that would melt sympathy from the public and silence the boardroom doubters. Meanwhile, Isabella remained blissfully unaware. She spent her days planning the nursery, shopping for tiny clothes, and smiling at the thought of her child's future. She believed her husband's distracted behavior was just nerves about becoming a father. When Richard kissed her forehead and told her he was working late, she never questioned where he really was. The closer the plan drew to reality, the colder Richard became. His heart, once capable of pretending to love, turned entirely to stone. Melissa fanned the flames of his greed, reminding him that every second Isabella lived was another second he remained second best. Finally, the night was chosen. After the gala, Isabella would be driven home in her limousine. Richard would wave her off with a smile, knowing the car was rigged to burn. Melissa would be waiting for him, champagne chilled, ready to celebrate their future. Neither of them imagined that fate and an unexpected man would rewrite their perfect plan. The annual Carter Enterprises Gala was the event of the year. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, champagne flowed like rivers, and every powerful figure in the city was present. It was a night designed to showcase Isabella Carter's empire, her wealth, her power, her image as the unstoppable queen of business. Photographers lined the red carpet, flashes sparking like fireworks as she arrived in a flowing silver gown that shimmered with each step. Isabella carried herself with her usual grace, her hand protectively resting on her small but visible baby bump. She was radiant, glowing not just with beauty, but with the quiet joy of impending motherhood. The cameras loved her, and the guests whispered about how she seemed softer, warmer than usual. For the first time, Isabella looked like more than a businesswoman. She looked like a mother-to-be, a woman with a complete life. But while the crowd admired her, Richard's eyes burned with contempt. Every compliment directed at Isabella was a dagger in his pride. He trailed beside her, smiling on cue, his hand on the small of her back, but inside he seethed. Tonight wasn't about celebrating her success. For him, tonight was the beginning of her downfall. The humiliation began subtly. Richard introduced Isabella to a group of investors, but instead of praising her leadership, he cracked jokes at her expense. Pregnancy brain? He chuckled when she momentarily forgot a name. Laughter rippled awkwardly, and Isabella forced a polite smile, hiding the sting behind her calm exterior. Later, as they stood by the buffet, Richard made a cruel remark about how much she was eating, loud enough for others to hear. "Careful, darling," he sneered. "You'll be bigger than the company jet at this rate." Melissa, mingling nearby under the guise of a business associate, smirked behind her champagne glass. Isabella's cheeks flushed, but she swallowed her pride. She refused to let Richard's barbs ruin the evening. She told herself he was just nervous about fatherhood, that stress was making him act out. She held her head high, greeting guests, thanking donors, doing her best to maintain her flawless image. What she didn't know was that outside, in the garage beneath the glittering ballroom, her limousine was waiting like a loaded gun. The tampered engine was primed, wires twisted in ways designed to spark, gasoline ready to ignite. The car that symbolized her wealth and power was now a silent trap, set to turn her into ashes. As the night wore on, Isabella grew tired. The baby shifted inside her, and she placed a gentle hand on her stomach. "Richard," she said softly, "I'm ready to go home." Richard forced a smile, hiding the excitement that surged inside him. "Of course, darling. Let's get you comfortable." He waved for the driver, his eyes cold with anticipation. The guests waved them off, believing they were witnessing a perfect couple heading home after a successful night. Isabella, exhausted but content, settled into the limousine, unaware of the danger. Richard lingered behind, pretending to take a call, and as the car pulled away into the night, Richard knew his deadly plan was finally in motion. The limousine glided smoothly through the quiet streets, its leather seats cradling Isabella as she leaned back with a tired but satisfied sigh. The gala had drained her, but it had also filled her with hope. The smiles, the congratulations, the subtle pats on her stomach. She felt loved, admired, and secure in her role, not just as CEO but as a mother-to-be. She rested her hand on her belly and whispered, "We're going to have such a beautiful life together." For a moment, all was calm. Then came the smell. A faint, acrid sting, sharp enough to make her nose wrinkle. Gasoline. At first, Isabella thought it was nothing, perhaps just the city air or a brief glitch in the car. But the scent grew stronger, thicker, suffocating. Her heart began to race. "Driver?" she called, leaning forward. But the partition was up and there was no response. She knocked harder. "Driver?" Still nothing. A chill prickled down her spine. Suddenly, the engine roared unnaturally, the car jerking forward faster than it should. Isabella's instincts screamed at her. She reached for the door handle, locked. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She tried the other door, locked. Panic clawed at her chest. And then it happened. A violent boom erupted from the hood, fire exploding outward and racing along the sides of the car. Flames licked the tinted windows, turning the luxurious limousine into a steel coffin. Smoke poured inside, thick and black, burning her lungs with every gasp. Isabella coughed, hacking desperately as her eyes watered and her vision blurred. She screamed, slamming her fists against the glass. "Help! Somebody help me!" But the street was empty, the city eerily silent around her. Her designer gown clung to her skin, damp with sweat as the heat intensified. She clawed at the door handle, her nails breaking, her knuckles raw and bloody. Tears streamed down her face, not from the smoke, but from the terror of losing not just her life, but the precious child inside her. In that hellish moment, Isabella wasn't the powerful CEO. She wasn't the woman whose signature could move millions of dollars. She was just a mother, begging the universe to spare her baby. Her mind raced with flashes of Richard, the man she trusted, the man she believed loved her. She imagined him waiting at home, worried sick. She whispered his name, clinging to the hope that he cared. But deep down, in the pit of her soul, a darker thought began to surface. What if this wasn't an accident? The fire spread quickly, flames curling around her, searing her skin. Her lungs screamed for air. She pounded on the glass with her fists, with her heels, with every ounce of strength she had left. Her screams grew weaker, her movements slower. Just when her body was about to surrender, she saw it, a shadow through the smoke. Someone was running toward her, a figure against the backdrop of fire. Strong arms slammed against the door, pulling, kicking, refusing to give up. Through the haze, Isabella's eyes widened. She recognized that face. It was David Miller, the man she had once fired without mercy. And now he was the only person standing between her and a fiery grave. The heat was unbearable, waves of fire pulsing against the limousine as if the car itself had turned into a furnace. Isabella's strength was fading, her fists too weak to strike the glass anymore. She pressed her palm to her stomach, whispering broken pleas to her unborn child. "Please, hold on. Please." And then, bang, The car door rattled violently. Through the wall of smoke, she saw him. David Miller. His face streaked with sweat and soot, his shirt already singed by the flames, his eyes blazing with determination. David had been on his way home from a late shift when he saw the fire. He didn't think. He didn't weigh the risks. He only knew someone was inside. And when he recognized Isabella, the very woman who had once crushed his career with a single cold sentence, he didn't pause. He ran harder. "Hang on," he shouted, kicking at the door with all his strength. The metal groaned but held firm. Isabella's terrified eyes met his, silently begging him not to leave. He grabbed a shard of concrete from the street and smashed it against the window, over and over, until cracks spiderwebbed across the glass. The flames roared louder, eating away at precious seconds. Finally, the window shattered, shards exploding outward. Smoke poured out and David thrust his arm inside. "Take my hand!" Isabella coughed violently, struggling to breathe, her body trembling with exhaustion. She reached out, her fingers barely brushing his. I can't," she sobbed, too weak. "Yes, you can," David barked, his voice raw with urgency. "You're not dying here, Isabella. Not like this. Not tonight." Summoning the last of her strength, Isabella grabbed hold. David pulled with every muscle in his body, cutting his arms on the glass as he dragged her through the window. The fire singed his skin, smoke clawed at his lungs, but he refused to let go. With one final heave, Isabella collapsed into his arms, her body trembling, her gown scorched and torn. He carried her away from the inferno, stumbling onto the sidewalk just as the limousine exploded behind them in a deafening blast. The shockwave knocked them forward, flames lighting up the night sky. David shielded Isabella with his own body, protecting her from the rain of debris. Isabella clung to him, sobbing uncontrollably, her voice hoarse. My baby. My baby." David looked into her tear-streaked face, his own chest heaving. He wanted to promise her everything would be okay, but the truth weighed heavy in his heart. Still, he tightened his arms around her and whispered, "You're alive. That's what matters right now. Stay with me." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Neighbors poured onto the streets, gasping at the sight of the burning limousine. Whispers spread quickly. "Is that Isabella Carter? The CEO?" People pointed, phones recorded, flashes of light catching Isabella's ruined gown and David's scorched clothes. But Isabella didn't hear them. She was slipping in and out of consciousness, clutching her stomach, her cries breaking David's heart. And as the ambulance screeched to a halt, neither of them knew that this rescue was only the beginning of a storm that would change their lives forever. The sterile white lights of the hospital felt colder than the flames Isabella had just escaped. Sirens faded as paramedics rushed her inside, her hands still clutching her stomach. David ran beside the stretcher, his clothes scorched, his arms bandaged hastily. He ignored his own pain, his only focus on the woman trembling in fear. "Please," Isabella whispered through cracked lips, her voice barely audible. "Save my baby, please." Doctors and nurses swarmed her, voices overlapping, machines beeping. David was pushed aside, left in the hallway with soot-stained hands and a heart pounding in helpless rhythm. He sank into a chair, staring at the swinging doors that had swallowed Isabella. For a man who had already buried a wife, the thought of another family torn apart was unbearable. Hours crawled by like years. At last, a doctor emerged, his expression solemn. David rose instantly. "How is she?" The doctor exhaled. "She's stable. She inhaled a dangerous amount of smoke, but she'll recover physically." He paused, lowering his voice. "I'm sorry. We couldn't save the baby." The word struck David like a blow. His fists clenched, his throat tightening. He knew he would have to be the one to face her with the truth. Inside the dim hospital room, Isabella lay pale and fragile, her hair damp with sweat. Her eyes fluttered open, searching for an answer in David's face. "My baby," she whispered, voice trembling with fragile hope. David's chest ached. He sat beside her, taking her trembling hand into his. His voice cracked as he whispered, "I'm so sorry, Isabella. The baby didn't make it." For a moment, silence. Then the dam inside her broke. Her cry was raw, primal, echoing off the walls. She clutched her stomach, sobbing with the kind of grief that tore through bone and soul alike. "No, no, no, that was my child, my future." David held her as she shattered, his arms strong yet gentle. He whispered the only words he could. "You're not alone. You're still here. And I'm not leaving." Tears soaked his shirt as she wept. her powerful image as CEO stripped away until only a broken mother remained. For the first time, Isabella allowed someone to see the side of her she had hidden from the world. The side that longed not for contracts or power, but for love, for family, for something real. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Richard poured champagne into Melissa's glass, celebrating as if he had already won. To him, the plan had succeeded. Isabella was as good as gone. He had no idea she had survived, no idea the empire he thought was falling into his lap was still guarded by the very woman he tried to destroy. Back in the hospital, David stayed by Isabella's side through the night, adjusting her blanket, offering water, whispering comfort whenever nightmares jolted her awake. He had once been discarded by her without mercy, but now he was the only one she had left to lean on. And in that moment of devastating loss, Isabella began to see David not as the man she fired, but as the man fate had sent to save her broken heart. While Isabella lay in a hospital bed grieving the loss of her unborn child, Richard Carter was already weaving his web of lies. To the outside world, he painted himself as the devastated husband who had narrowly avoided tragedy. To Melissa, he played the role of the confident mastermind, assuring her everything was under control. He showed up at the hospital hours after Isabella's emergency, his shirt neatly pressed, his tie perfectly knotted. He entered the room with rehearsed grief on his face, clutching a bouquet of flowers as though they could erase the flames he had set into motion. "Oh, Bella," he whispered, rushing to her bedside. "Thank God you're alive. I don't know what I would have done if I'd lost you." Isabella turned her head away, silent tears streaking down her pale cheeks. David stood in the corner of the room, his arms crossed, eyes narrowing at Richard's every word. He didn't believe a single one of them. Richard reached for Isabella's hand, but she pulled it away weakly. Her voice cracked as she asked the question burning in her soul. "Where were you, Richard? Why weren't you with me?" His answer came smoothly, without hesitation. "I got a call from a board member. An urgent matter I couldn't ignore. I thought you'd be safe in the car. I never imagined. Bella, please, you have to believe me. This was a terrible accident." His performance was flawless, his voice dripping with sorrow, his eyes glistening with fake tears. To anyone else, it might have been convincing. But to Isabella, something felt wrong. The way his hands trembled only when she looked at him. The way his gaze flickered too quickly toward David, almost as if threatened by his presence. David's jaw clenched. He had seen enough lies in his life to recognize one. He stepped forward, his tone steady but cutting. "Funny thing about accidents, Richard. They don't usually involve rigged fuel lines and faulty wires that were tampered with. Someone wanted that car to burn." Richard's mask faltered for a split second before he caught himself. He forced a hollow chuckle. "You must be mistaken. What would I gain from something like that? Isabella is my wife, the mother of my child." He stopped abruptly, realizing too late what he had said. Isabella's face twisted with pain. "Mother of your child? Richard, the baby is gone." Her voice cracked, tears spilling again. "I lost our baby in that fire. Do you even care?" Richard stumbled over his words, fumbling for sympathy. "Of course I care, I'm devastated. But we can try again, we'll rebuild, we'll—" His words rang empty, each one slicing deeper into Isabella's broken heart. She saw no grief in his eyes, only irritation that his plan hadn't worked as intended. That night, as Richard left the hospital room, David leaned closer to Isabella and whispered, "He's hiding something, and I promise you, we'll find the truth." For the first time, Isabella began to question whether the fire had truly been fate or Richard's betrayal. The morning after the fire, Carter Enterprises was buzzing with whispers. The news had already spread. Isabella Carter, the powerful CEO, had narrowly escaped death in a limousine explosion. The media called it a freak accident, but inside the company, rumors swirled like wildfire. Investors were nervous, board members unsettled, and enemies of Isabella smelled blood in the water. Richard seized the opportunity. He walked into the boardroom with his polished shoes echoing against the marble floor, his expression grave but controlled. He positioned himself as the protective husband, eager to support his wife and safeguard the company in her absence. Isabella, still weak from the hospital, insisted on attending the emergency meeting. She arrived with David at her side, his arm discreetly steadying her as she walked. The room fell silent when they entered. all eyes on the woman who had survived flames. But instead of sympathy, she felt suspicion. The board members exchanged glances, whispering behind their hands. Richard cleared his throat dramatically. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we are facing a crisis. Last night, my wife nearly lost her life. And while we're grateful she survived, we must face the truth. Someone inside this company may have been negligent, or worse, malicious." The accusation hung heavy in the air. Isabella's eyes narrowed, but before she could speak, Richard continued. "I have reason to believe the incident was not random. The limousine was maintained by our own staff, and the man who interfered at the scene, who tampered with evidence before authorities arrived." He paused, letting the silence build tension. Then he pointed directly at David. "Was him." Gasps erupted. David stiffened, his fists clenching at his sides. "That's a lie," he said firmly. "I didn't tamper with anything. I pulled Isabella out of a burning car. If I hadn't been there, she would be dead right now." But Richard was prepared. He slid photos across the table, images of David at the scene, his hands on the car, his clothes scorched. These were taken by bystanders. To an untrained eye, it looks like heroism. But what if he staged it? What if he sabotaged the car, then swooped in as the savior to cover his tracks? The room erupted in nervous murmurs. Isabella's face went pale. She opened her mouth to defend David, but Richard cut in quickly. "Bella, I know you want to believe the best in people, but this man has every reason to hate you. You fired him. You humiliated him. Perhaps this was his revenge." David's voice cracked with restrained fury. "I don't care what you say about me, but don't twist the truth. I risked my life to save hers." He looked directly at Isabella, his eyes pleading. "You know that." But the board wasn't interested in truth. They wanted stability. Fear clouded their judgment. By the end of the meeting, a motion was passed. David was to be dismissed immediately, banned from the company premises. As security escorted him out, Isabella's heart wrenched. She wanted to stop them, to reveal her suspicions about Richard, but she was too weak, too cornered. And as David's figure disappeared from the glass doors, Isabella realized she had lost the only man she could truly trust. Isabella Carter had built her empire on discipline and strategy, but in the weeks after the fire, her heart was heavy, her body weakened by grief. She should have been resting, healing from the loss of her child. Instead, she forced herself into a new mission: finding out the truth. The board may have turned against David, but Isabella's instincts told her Richard was hiding something. His performance at the hospital, his crocodile tears, his eagerness to shift blame. All of it gnawed at her. She knew power games when she saw them, and her own husband was playing one inside her home. So she did what any CEO would do. She launched an investigation, quietly, secretly. Isabella contacted a trusted security consultant, one who owed her favors from past deals. "I need surveillance," she instructed. "Follow Richard, discreetly. Track his meetings, his phone calls, his accounts. Leave nothing unchecked." Days turned into nights, and Isabella buried herself in the evidence. She pored over bank statements, late-night credit card charges, strange transfers that had nothing to do with company business. Patterns began to emerge, pointing to hotels, jewelry purchases, and dinners for two. The puzzle slowly built itself, piece by damning piece. One evening, the consultant placed a file on her desk. "You need to see this," he said gravely. Isabella opened it with trembling hands. Inside were photographs, grainy but clear enough. Richard, her husband, kissing a younger woman in the lobby of an upscale hotel. Richard holding her waist, his hand far too familiar. Richard laughing with her in a way Isabella hadn't seen in years. Her breath caught in her throat. The woman was Melissa Sinclair, a name she recognized from society events, a woman known for her beauty and ruthless ambition. Isabella's stomach churned as realization struck. Richard hadn't just betrayed her heart, he had conspired with Melissa to destroy her. She closed the file slowly, her hands shaking. The memory of the flames, the sound of the explosion, the pain of losing her baby, all of it rushed back with brutal clarity. Richard hadn't just been careless, he had tried to kill her. That night, Isabella sat alone in her study, staring at the city lights through glass windows. Tears streamed silently down her face, but her eyes burned with a new fire. For too long she had been blind, softened by love, weakened by hope. No more. She had lost her child, but she would not lose herself. Her phone buzzed. A message from the consultant: "There's more. You'll want to see it in person." Isabella wiped her tears, her resolve hardening. She wasn't the broken woman Richard thought he had left in the hospital bed. She was still Isabella Carter, the CEO, the survivor, the woman who had built an empire from nothing. And now, she was preparing to take back her life. Richard had written her obituary too soon. She was alive, and soon the world would know the truth. The night Isabella discovered Richard's affair, she felt both shattered and sharpened. Betrayal had carved wounds into her heart, but beneath the pain, a colder, stronger resolve was forming. She knew she couldn't fight this battle alone. Richard had charm, influence, and the board under his thumb. She needed someone who understood loyalty, someone who had already proven his courage when no one else would. Her thoughts turned to David Miller. It had been weeks since the board forced him out, humiliated him once again. Isabella had tried to reach out, but David hadn't answered. He had every reason to hate her, for firing him once, for letting Richard frame him again. Yet she couldn't shake the memory of his arms pulling her from the fire, of his quiet strength in the hospital when she thought her world had ended. One evening, Isabella swallowed her pride and drove herself to a modest neighborhood on the edge of the city. The house was small, its paint chipped, the yard littered with Lily's toys. She hesitated at the door before knocking. David answered, his face hardening the moment he saw her. "Why are you here?" His tone was sharp, protective. Behind him, little Lily peeked out, her innocent eyes widening at the sight of the glamorous woman who had once destroyed her father's career. "I need your help," Isabella said simply. Her voice trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of humility. "Richard, he's not just unfaithful. He tried to kill me, and I can't prove it without you." David's jaw tightened. For a long moment silence filled the doorway. Then he stepped aside, letting her in. Over steaming cups of coffee at his worn kitchen table, Isabella laid everything out: the affair, the financial records, the photographs of Richard and Melissa. Her hands shook as she spoke, but her voice remained steady. David listened, his expression unreadable, his daughter quietly coloring in the corner. When Isabella finished, David leaned back, crossing his arms. "You're asking a lot, Isabella. You fired me, twice. You let Richard turn everyone against me. Why should I believe you now?" Her eyes welled with tears. "Because you were the only one who didn't let me die. Because I have no one else I can trust." Something in her words broke through his defenses. David had built walls around his heart after so much loss, but he couldn't ignore the truth in her voice. He had seen the fire in her eyes before, the fire of a woman who refused to surrender. Now that fire was tempered by pain, and it stirred something in him: compassion, maybe even admiration. At last he nodded slowly. "All right, but if we do this, we do it my way. Quiet, careful. No boardroom theatrics until we have undeniable proof." Relief washed over Isabella as she exhaled. For the first time since the fire, she felt the faint flicker of hope. Together, they began outlining a plan. Surveillance, financial tracking, gathering witnesses. Piece by piece, they would dismantle Richard's empire of lies. And side by side, Isabella and David were about to wage a war that Richard never saw coming. While Isabella and David quietly pieced together evidence, Richard was busy building castles in the air with Melissa Sinclair. To him, the failed assassination was only a temporary setback. Isabella might have survived, but in his mind, it was only a matter of time before he took everything that should have been his. Melissa draped across a velvet sofa in her penthouse, sipping champagne as she flipped through fashion magazines. "You worry too much," she purred, glancing at Richard over the rim of her glass. "The board already trusts you more than her. You just have to keep the pressure on. She's weak now, grieving. This is the perfect moment to strike." Richard paced the room, his jaw tight. "I wanted her gone, Melissa, permanently. Instead, she's clinging to life like some stubborn weed. And that fire, people still talk about it. I need her out of the way, or the empire doesn't move to me." Melissa smirked, tossing her magazine aside. "Then make her look incompetent. Let her spiral. You know how people love to tear down a fallen queen, and when she collapses, you'll be there to take her throne." Richard paused, considering her words. His mind raced with possibilities. If Isabella appeared unstable, distracted, the board would side with him. He began to imagine press releases with his name, magazine covers showing him as the grieving widower turned visionary leader. He would finally be free of her shadow. But Melissa wasn't done. She leaned forward, her voice low and persuasive. "And when you're officially in charge, you and I will be unstoppable. No more hiding in hotel rooms. No more secrets. We'll have everything. Her company, her fortune, her power. She'll be nothing but a sad story." Richard's lips curved into a smile. "And her so-called hero, David Miller? He's already gone. The board doesn't trust him. He's finished." Melissa laughed softly, clinking her glass against his. "Perfect. Then it's only a matter of time. Soon, Richard, it will all be ours." They toasted to a future built on betrayal, blind to the storm brewing against them. Back at the company, Richard began executing his plan. He planted whispers among board members, hinting that Isabella was too emotional to lead after her tragic loss. He exaggerated her absences from meetings, spun her grief into weakness, painted her as a liability. Slowly, he poisoned the well, turning colleagues into doubters. Meanwhile, Melissa flaunted their relationship in subtle ways, showing up at exclusive events on Richard's arm, pretending to be a consultant, while letting speculation swirl. The tabloids began to buzz, but Richard brushed it off, confident that the world was buying his performance as the steady, grieving husband. In private, he and Melissa laughed at Isabella's supposed downfall. They believed they had already won. But what Richard didn't know was that Isabella and David were already watching, already gathering every piece of evidence that would one day tear his world apart. Evelyn Price was no stranger to the brutal games of corporate power. As CEO of a rival firm and one of the sharpest minds in the financial world, she had sparred with Isabella for years. Their relationship had always been a tense balance, sometimes competitors, sometimes allies, but always with mutual respect. Evelyn admired Isabella's discipline, even if she never admitted it publicly. When news broke of Isabella's accident, Evelyn raised an eyebrow. She had seen too many powerful women conveniently silenced, too many tragedies that benefited the men standing in the shadows. She didn't believe in coincidences, and Richard Carter's sudden attempts to step into the spotlight reeked of something rotten. At a charity luncheon weeks later, Evelyn encountered Richard. He approached her with the slick smile of a salesman, his hand outstretched, his tone dripping with false charm. "Evelyn," he greeted warmly, "it's been too long. Isabella is still recovering, so I'm stepping up to make sure the company stays strong. Perhaps we could discuss a partnership over dinner?" Evelyn studied him like a hawk sizing up prey. His eyes were too eager, his words rehearsed. She had seen his type before, men who craved power but lacked the backbone to build it themselves. She offered him a polite smile, but inside alarms blared. Later that evening, Evelyn made a quiet phone call. "Isabella," she said when the line connected. "It's Evelyn Price, we need to talk." Isabella was surprised. Evelyn was not someone who reached out casually. "Why?" she asked cautiously. "Because your husband is circling like a vulture," Evelyn replied bluntly. "And I don't think his concern for you is genuine. I've been in this game long enough to smell a setup. Whatever he's planning, you can count me in to expose him." For the first time in weeks, Isabella felt a flicker of strength she hadn't realized she needed. She agreed to meet Evelyn in secret, away from Richard's eyes. Over glasses of wine in a quiet corner of an upscale restaurant, Evelyn laid her cards on the table. Men like Richard never think ahead. They're sloppy. They leave trails. If you and I work together, we'll find them. And when we do, I'll make sure the board has no choice but to listen. Isabella listened, her heart swelling with cautious hope. Evelyn wasn't a friend, not exactly, but she was a woman who understood the cost of survival in a man's world. She was powerful, strategic, and ruthless when she needed to be, the perfect ally. Meanwhile, Richard grew bolder. He strutted into board meetings with Melissa on his arm, claiming she was a consultant hired to advise him. The board shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. He believed he had silenced all opposition. What he didn't know was that two of the sharpest women in the corporate world, Isabella and Evelyn, were quietly aligning against him. And when their trap finally snapped shut, Richard's empire of lies would come crashing down. The grand hall of the annual corporate summit shimmered with gold chandeliers and echoed with the hum of powerful voices. Executives, investors, and journalists crowded into the space, eager to witness the event that shaped the financial world each year. Richard Carter walked onto the stage in a tailored suit, Melissa at his side, her smile smug and victorious. To the audience, it looked like Richard had stepped into his wife's shoes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, his tone solemn, "I stand before you during a difficult time. My wife, Isabella, is still recovering from her tragic accident. But rest assured, Carter Enterprises remains strong under my leadership." Polite applause followed, though some faces in the crowd looked uncertain. Rumors had spread, whispers about Richard's growing arrogance and Melissa's suspicious presence. Still, Richard believed he had won. He carried himself like a king, claiming his crown. But just as he began to outline his so-called vision for the company's future, the doors at the back of the hall opened. Silence rippled through the room as Isabella Carter entered, dressed in a striking black suit that radiated authority. Every step she took echoed like a drumbeat of defiance. David walked behind her, carrying a thick folder of documents, and Evelyn trailed with a confident smirk. Richard's face drained of color. He hadn't expected her to show. Isabella walked straight to the stage, her gaze locked on her husband. "Step aside, Richard," she said, her voice steady, powerful. "This is my company, and tonight the truth comes out." The audience leaned forward, captivated. Journalists raised their cameras. Board members exchanged nervous glances. Richard forced a laugh, though his voice trembled. "Bella, darling, you shouldn't be here. You're not well." "I am well enough to expose you." Isabella cut him off, her eyes flashing. She turned to the crowd, holding up the folder. "For weeks, you've all heard whispers. Tonight, you'll hear the truth. This man, my husband, the man who vowed to protect me, conspired with his mistress to kill me." Gasps erupted. Cameras flashed wildly. Melissa shifted uncomfortably, her composure cracking. Isabella continued, her voice sharp and clear. "Here are the financial records, proof of secret transfers to mechanics who tampered with my limousine. Here are surveillance photos of Richard and Melissa together, plotting my downfall. And here," she held up a USB drive, "are recorded calls between them, where they laugh about my death." The hall exploded with shock. Richard's mask shattered as board members surged to their feet, demanding explanations. Melissa's face turned pale, her hand trembling as she tried to grab Richard's arm. "This is outrageous," Richard shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the murmurs of betrayal and disgust. Isabella's presence was unshakable, her tone fierce. "You tried to take my life. You succeeded in taking my child. But you will not take my company, and you will not escape justice." David stepped forward, placing the folder onto the table before the board. Evelyn nodded firmly. The evidence was undeniable, and in that charged silence, Richard realized his empire of lies was crumbling in front of everyone he sought to rule. The grand hall erupted into chaos after Isabella's revelation. Board members shouted across the table, investors demanded answers, and journalists swarmed forward, their cameras flashing like lightning. Richard stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief, while Melissa clung to his arm, her composure cracking under the weight of the evidence. "Lies," Richard roared, slamming his fist against the podium. "All lies. My wife has lost her mind. She's grieving, unstable. How can you trust a woman who just lost her child?" But his words backfired. Gasps of horror spread across the room, and Isabella's face twisted with grief. David stepped forward, his voice steady and loud enough for all to hear. "She lost her child because of you. Because of your greed, and the proof is right here." Evelyn added, "The board will not tolerate a murderer, Richard. You're finished." Richard's eyes darted wildly, searching for support, but found only disgust. The board members he had courted turned their backs. Investors whispered of scandal and lawsuits. The once admiring audience now looked at him like a predator exposed in daylight. Then Melissa, sensing the walls closing in, stepped back. Her grip on Richard's arm loosened. "Richard," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They have everything. We can't win this." Richard glared at her, panic bubbling. "Don't you dare leave me. You're in this as much as I am." But Melissa's survival instincts were sharper than her loyalty. She raised her hands, her voice cutting through the noise. "I had no part in the fire. It was all Richard's idea. He paid the mechanic. He planned everything. I was manipulated." The room gasped again, turning their full fury on Richard. His face flushed red with rage. "You lying snake!" he shouted, lunging toward her. But security moved quickly, restraining him before he could touch her. Melissa backed away, crocodile tears streaming down her face as she played the victim. I was foolish. I thought he loved me, but he's nothing but a monster. Isabella stood tall, her voice commanding the silence once more. You chose him, Melissa. You laughed while he plotted my death. But you're right about one thing. He is a monster. And tonight, the monster faces justice. At that moment, police officers entered the hall, their uniforms stark against the glittering backdrop of wealth and power. The lead detective stepped forward. Richard Carter, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted homicide, and corporate fraud. The clink of handcuffs echoed louder than any gavel. Richard thrashed against the officers, shouting curses at Isabella, at Melissa, at anyone within earshot. This isn't over. You think you've beaten me, Bella? You'll regret this. But his words were drowned out by the cheers of reporters, the murmurs of board members relieved to see justice served. Melissa, meanwhile, slipped quietly out the back door, her tears drying quickly. She had betrayed Richard to save herself. But deep down, she knew her own reckoning would come. And as Richard was dragged out of the hall in handcuffs, Isabella finally saw the empire he tried to steal collapse around him, leaving him with nothing but disgrace. The weeks after Richard's arrest were a blur of court hearings, media frenzy, and boardroom battles. Yet, for the first time in months, Isabella felt a strange kind of peace settling over her life. The storm had finally broken, and though she carried scars, both physical and emotional, she was still standing. She was alive. David was there through every step. When journalists swarmed her mansion gates, he shielded her. When the nightmares woke her in the dead of night, he sat by her bed, whispering words of comfort until she could breathe again. When grief threatened to drown her, he reminded her that survival itself was victory. One evening, Isabella invited him and his daughter Lily to dinner at her estate. The mansion, once cold and sterile, filled with laughter as Lily's giggles echoed through the grand hall. The little girl twirled in her socks across marble floors, her drawings scattered on tables that once only held contracts and reports. Isabella found herself smiling genuinely for the first time in years. After dinner, Isabella and David stepped onto the balcony, the city lights glittering below them. A soft breeze carried the scent of jasmine from her garden. For a long moment they stood in silence, the unspoken weight of everything they had endured lingering between them. Finally, Isabella turned to him. Her voice was soft, almost uncertain. David, I don't know how to thank you. You saved my life, not once, but countless times since that night. I don't know where I'd be without you. David looked at her, his eyes steady and warm. You don't need to thank me. I did what anyone with a conscience would do. But Isabella, you're stronger than you realize. You didn't just survive Richard. You stood up to him. You took back your life. That's something no one can take from you. Her eyes welled with tears, not of sorrow, but of something new, hope. She reached for his hand, hesitating for just a second before intertwining her fingers with his. I used to think power and success were enough, she admitted. But they're not. I've never felt as safe or as seen as I do when I'm with you. David's hand tightened around hers, his voice low and sincere. And I've never met anyone as brave as you, Isabella. You may have fired me once, but fate gave me the chance to be here when it mattered most. I don't want to waste that chance. Their eyes locked. And for the first time, Isabella allowed herself to lean in, not as a CEO, not as a survivor, but as a woman longing for love. Their lips met in a gentle kiss, a promise of healing and new beginnings. Inside the mansion, Lily's laughter carried through the halls, a reminder that family wasn't measured in bloodlines or fortune, but in love and loyalty. And on that balcony, under the glow of city lights, Isabella realized she had finally found the home she had always dreamed of. Not in walls of glass and steel, but in the arms of the man who had saved her heart. The courthouse was packed the day Richard Carter was sentenced. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and the world watched as the once charming husband was declared guilty of conspiracy, attempted murder, and fraud. His face was twisted with rage as the gavel struck, sentencing him to decades behind bars. Melissa, the mistress who betrayed him to save herself, had vanished from high society, her name whispered with disdain at every party she once craved to attend. For Isabella, justice had finally been served. But more than revenge, what she felt was release. A heavy chain broken, a door to a new future wide open. She walked out of the courthouse hand in hand with David, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like a queen fighting to defend her throne. She felt like a woman who had finally found peace. Months later, the world saw a different side of Isabella Carter. No longer just the ruthless CEO, she appeared at charity events with David and Lily, smiling with warmth that was genuine, not staged for cameras. Her mansion became a home filled with life, where Lily's drawings decorated the walls and laughter replaced the echoes of silence. And then came the news that made her heart leap with both fear and joy. Isabella was pregnant again. When she showed David the test, her hands shook, but his embrace was steady, his voice firm. "This time," he whispered, "we'll face it together." The months that followed were filled with hope and healing. David attended every doctor's appointment, held her hand during sleepless nights, and reminded her with each passing day that she was never alone. Isabella, once defined by her empire, began to redefine herself as a partner, a mother, and a woman who could balance power with love. Their wedding was small but beautiful. In the garden of her estate, beneath strings of golden lights and surrounded by close friends, Isabella walked down the aisle in a simple ivory gown. David stood waiting with Lily by his side, the little girl holding a bouquet and beaming with pride. When Isabella reached them, Lily slipped her hand into hers and whispered, "Now we're really a family." Tears blurred Isabella's vision as she nodded, kissing the girl's forehead before saying her vows. The ceremony was not about grandeur, but about truth. Isabella promised to cherish the man who had saved her not just from fire, but from despair. David vowed to protect her not because of her wealth, but because he loved her heart. When they kissed, applause erupted, but all Isabella heard was the beating of her own heart, steady and full of joy. Months later, Isabella gave birth to a healthy baby boy. David held their son in his arms, Lily leaning against Isabella's side, whispering promises to be the best big sister. The house overflowed with love, something no amount of money could ever buy. And so, from ashes and betrayal, Isabella Carter rose not only as a survivor, but as a woman reborn, finding happiness, love, and the family she had always longed for. So here we are, my dear friends, at the end of Isabella's story. If you're still with me right now, it means something in this journey touched your heart in a real way. And maybe that's because her story isn't just about wealth, betrayal, or revenge. It's about something deeper. It's about resilience, about love born from ashes, and about finding peace when life tries to break you. The Stoic philosopher Seneca once said, "Difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body." Isabella's pain was unbearable, losing her child, being betrayed by the man she trusted most. But instead of letting it destroy her, she chose to rise again, to love again, and to rebuild her life on stronger foundations. That is something each of us can take to heart. No matter what storms we face, the power to rise again is always within us. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Isabella could not control Richard's cruelty, but she could control how she responded. And in choosing not to let bitterness consume her, she found healing. In life, we too will encounter betrayal, heartbreak, or moments that feel impossible to survive. But like Isabella, we can choose to stand tall, to let the pain shape us instead of shatter us. So my wonderful friends, if you're here with me now, maybe this story reminded you of your own battles, your own scars. I want you to remember, you are not defined by what breaks you, but by how you rebuild after. Love, loyalty, and inner strength are the real treasures in this life. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something deep inside, please like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel. Together, let's keep telling stories that remind us of the strength and beauty hidden in the human heart. The hum of the private jet was low, steady, almost soothing, but inside the cabin, the atmosphere was anything but calm. The plush leather seats, polished mahogany tables, and chilled champagne bottles painted a picture of elegance and power. Yet for Emily Carter, sitting in the farthest corner with her hands protectively covering her 6-month pregnant belly, that luxury felt like a cage. Her heart was pounding, her eyes were burning, and every sound from across the aisle cut deeper into her soul. Her husband, Adrian Carter, was leaning back comfortably in one of the oversized seats, a glass of whiskey in his hand. His tie was loosened, his smile smug, his laughter filling the cabin. Next to him, draped in a shimmering silver dress that left little to the imagination, sat Vanessa Moore, his lover. Her manicured fingers rested boldly on Adrian's arm, her red lips brushing against his ear as she whispered something that made him roar with laughter. It wasn't just intimacy, it was a public display meant to humiliate. Emily could feel every pair of eyes flicking between her and the couple across the cabin. A few business partners, 2 high-profile investors, and even the flight attendants had been forced to witness the ugly scene. Everyone knew Adrian was married. Everyone knew she was his wife. And yet, here he was, flaunting his mistress before them like she didn't even exist. She blinked rapidly, willing herself not to cry. Crying would only make it worse. Crying would give Vanessa the satisfaction she clearly wanted. Because Vanessa wasn't subtle. Every time she leaned closer to Adrian, she shot a triumphant glance at Emily, like a cat playing with a wounded bird. Her laugh was sharp, shrill, and cutting. Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat, feeling her baby move beneath her ribs. She whispered under her breath, "It's okay, sweetheart. Mama's here. We'll be fine." But deep inside, she didn't believe her own words. She felt trapped in a marriage that had become a nightmare, trapped on a jet where she couldn't escape, trapped in humiliation that cut her deeper than any blade could. Adrian raised his glass in mock celebration, turning his head just enough to look at her. "Cheer up, Emily," he said loudly, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You should be happy. Not everyone gets to fly to Paris on a jet like this. You should try smiling. You look pathetic." The room chuckled awkwardly. The investors exchanged glances, some embarrassed, some entertained. Emily's cheeks flushed with heat, but she didn't respond. She had learned long ago that answering Adrian in public only made things worse. He thrived on her pain. He enjoyed showing the world how little she mattered to him now. Vanessa leaned into him, her perfume filling the air. "She's just jealous, darling," she purred loud enough for everyone to hear. "Not every woman can keep a man like you." Then she tilted her head back and laughed, a cruel, triumphant laugh that sliced through Emily's chest. Emily's fingers tightened on the armrest. The baby kicked again, as if sensing her distress. For a moment, she thought she might collapse. The humiliation was unbearable, but it was the betrayal that shattered her. Once upon a time, Adrian had been the man she trusted with her life, the man who promised to love her through every thwart. The jet hit a pocket of turbulence, jolting the passengers. Vanessa shrieked playfully and clutched Adrian's arm, while he chuckled and reassured her. Emily steadied herself with one hand on her belly. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her husband could comfort his mistress, but he had never once asked her if she was comfortable during this pregnancy. The silence that followed the turbulence was heavy. Emily tried to focus on the hum of the engines, on her breathing, on anything that would keep her from breaking down in front of these people. But then Vanessa's voice rang out again, sharp as a knife. "Tell me, Emily," she sneered, turning her head deliberately. "Do you ever wonder why he chose me? Why he prefers my company instead of yours?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Adrian smirked, taking another sip of his drink, not even attempting to defend his wife. The investors leaned forward, uncomfortable but curious. Emily swallowed hard, her throat tight. She wanted to scream, to cry, to demand respect, but the words caught in her chest. She sat frozen, her silence only feeding their cruelty. Vanessa leaned closer, her eyes glinting with malice. "It's simple, really. Some women are meant to be admired, cherished, desired." She tilted her head smugly. "And others, well, they're just meant to be forgotten." The cabin erupted in soft laughter, muffled whispers, and clicking glasses. Emily's eyes blurred with tears she refused to let fall. She turned her gaze to the small oval window, the night sky stretching endlessly outside. Stars blinked faintly, mocking her with their distance. Her stomach churned, her heart ached, and in that moment she realized she was completely alone. Adrian had abandoned her emotionally long before this night, and now he was stripping her dignity in front of the world. But what she didn't realize, what no one realized, was that someone else had been watching. Someone who had remained silent, his expression unreadable, his glass untouched. Alexander Carter, Adrian's older brother, sat at the far end of the cabin. A billionaire in his own right, he had built empires with the kind of precision and discipline Adrian had never possessed. His presence was powerful, commanding, yet restrained. Unlike Adrian, he didn't need to flaunt his wealth or charm. He simply existed, and the room bent to his gravity. Throughout the evening, Alexander hadn't said a word. He had observed quietly, his sharp eyes missing nothing: the cruelty, the humiliation, the mockery. Now, as Vanessa's laugh echoed again and Emily's shoulders trembled in silent despair, his jaw tightened. His knuckles whitened around the stem of his glass. For the first time, he leaned forward, his voice cutting through the cabin like steel. "That's enough." The laughter died instantly. All eyes turned to him. Adrian froze, the smirk slipping from his face. Vanessa blinked, her painted lips parting in shock. And Emily, wide-eyed, looked up at the man she had barely dared to acknowledge until now, because what Alexander was about to do would change everything. The silence that followed Alexander's words was deafening. The private jet, once filled with laughter and arrogance, now felt colder, tighter, almost suffocating. Everyone turned to look at him, their surprise clear. Adrian shifted uncomfortably in his seat, caught between irritation and unease. Vanessa's confident smirk faltered, her perfectly manicured nails tapping nervously on the rim of her glass. Emily sat frozen, her wide eyes fixed on Alexander. For a moment, just a brief, fleeting moment, she felt like someone had finally seen her, seen the humiliation, the cruelty, the quiet suffering. But that moment of fragile relief was short-lived. Adrian let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. "Come on, Alex," he sneered, raising his glass toward his brother. "Don't tell me you're taking her side. She's my wife, not yours. If I want to joke with her, I will." "Joke?" Alexander's voice was calm, dangerously calm. "That didn't sound like a joke to me." Adrian's eyes narrowed, but instead of answering, he leaned back in his seat, pretending not to care. Vanessa, however, wasn't ready to back down. She leaned forward, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Honestly, Alexander, you shouldn't waste your concern. Some women just don't know how to keep their husbands happy. Emily had her chance. Now it's my turn." The words sliced through the cabin like glass. Emily flinched, her hands instinctively clutching her belly. Heat rose to her face, her humiliation growing unbearable. She wanted to disappear, to vanish into thin air, but she couldn't. She was trapped in this flying prison, forced to listen as the woman her husband paraded beside him mocked her existence. Adrian chuckled, clearly entertained. "Vanessa's right. Emily, you've been lacking. I deserve more. I deserve a woman who understands me, who doesn't drag me down with her mood swings and demands." He gestured toward Vanessa with a smug grin. "That's why she's here. She makes me feel alive." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Even the investors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was no longer just gossip. It was cruelty, delivered with an audience. Emily's chest tightened. She bit her lip so hard she tasted blood, fighting back the sob clawing at her throat. But before she could respond, Vanessa stood. The click of her heels on the polished floor echoed like a countdown. She walked across the narrow aisle, stopping in front of Emily's seat. "Let's be honest," Vanessa sneered, folding her arms across her chest. "Look at you, sitting there like a wounded animal, hiding behind your belly. Do you think pity will keep a man? Do you think being pregnant makes you special? Women get pregnant every day." Emily's breath hitched, her hands tightened over her stomach, as if shielding her unborn child from the venom spilling from this woman's mouth. Vanessa leaned down, her face inches from Emily's. Her perfume was overwhelming, sharp and nauseating. Her voice dropped into a whisper meant to sting deeper. "He doesn't love you anymore. He never will. You're nothing but dead weight." Then, in one swift, shocking motion, Vanessa's hand shot out. She grabbed a fistful of Emily's hair and yanked. Emily gasped, a cry of pain ripping from her throat as her head snapped back. The sudden jolt nearly threw her from her seat. Panic surged through her body, her heart racing, her arms instinctively wrapping around her belly to protect her baby. The cabin erupted. Gasps, shouts, the scrape of chairs against the floor. One of the investors half rose from his seat in shock. The flight attendant dropped the bottle she was holding, glass shattering across the floor. But the loudest sound was Adrian's laugh. He didn't move to stop Vanessa. He didn't protect his pregnant wife. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, grinning, enjoying the spectacle like it was entertainment. "Careful, Vanessa," he drawled, smirking. "Don't hurt her too much. She's fragile." Emily's tears blurred her vision as pain burned across her scalp. Her humiliation was complete. Her husband had allowed his mistress to lay hands on her, on his pregnant wife, and instead of stopping it, he encouraged it. Her chest heaved. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Adrian, please." But her plea was drowned in Vanessa's laughter, cruel and triumphant. "You see? Even she knows she's powerless. She can't fight me. She can't fight anyone." Emily's whole body trembled, her dignity shredded. She felt the weight of every pair of eyes on her, judging, pitying, mocking. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but the fear of harming her baby held her frozen. All she could do was endure the humiliation, her heart breaking with every second. It was Alexander who moved first. His chair scraped back with a suddenness that silenced the cabin. He crossed the aisle in 2 long strides, his presence so commanding that Vanessa's grip faltered. He seized her wrist with a strength that made her gasp and forced her to release Emily's hair. "That's enough," he said, his voice like ice. His glare pinned Vanessa in place, her bravado crumbling under the weight of his authority. "Touch her again, and you'll regret it." Vanessa recoiled, rubbing her wrist, her eyes flashing with fear and fury. Adrian's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of unease. For once, he seemed to realize that his brother was not going to ignore his behavior. Emily, her hair disheveled, her cheeks wet with tears, sat trembling in her seat. Her chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. She looked up at Alexander, shock and gratitude mingling in her gaze. No one had ever stood up for her like that, not since her marriage began to crumble. Alexander didn't look at her directly, but his tone softened ever so slightly. "You're safe now," he said quietly, then turned his steely gaze back to Adrian. "You disgust me," he said flatly. "You let another woman assault your pregnant wife, and you laughed. Do you have any idea what kind of man that makes you?" The cabin was silent. Adrian opened his mouth, but no words came. His arrogance was faltering. Emily's tears slowed, but the ache in her chest only grew. She had been humiliated, degraded, almost broken, and yet, in that moment, a seed of something unfamiliar stirred inside her. It wasn't hope, not yet. But it was the faintest whisper of strength, because for the first time someone had seen her pain and refused to let it continue. And she couldn't shake the feeling that this night was only the beginning of what was to come. The cabin of the jet felt like a courtroom, every eye fixed on the tall, imposing figure of Alexander Carter. His presence filled the room, swallowing the smugness that had lingered only moments before. Where Adrian thrived on cheap laughter and cruel games, Alexander carried something heavier, an authority that silenced people without him raising his voice. Emily sat hunched in her seat, her hair disheveled from Vanessa's assault, her body trembling as she clutched her stomach protectively. Tears still glistened on her cheeks, but she was no longer completely alone. For the first time in years, someone had stepped between her and her tormentors. She could hardly breathe as she tried to process what had just happened. Vanessa had backed away, her bravado cracked. Her painted lips parted as she tried to speak, but no sound came out. She had underestimated Alexander. Everyone had. Alexander's gaze swept the room, slow and deliberate. "What you all just witnessed," he said evenly, "was not only shameful, it was criminal." The investors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. These were men used to power plays, to watching fortunes rise and fall like dice in a game. But even they could not ignore the weight of his words. His voice carried something that demanded obedience, like a gavel striking down. Adrian forced a laugh, though his eyes betrayed unease. "Oh, come on, Alex. Don't make this into something it isn't. We were having fun. Emily's too sensitive. Vanessa just got carried away. No harm done." "No harm done?" Alexander's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "She's carrying your child, Adrian? Do you even understand what that means?" His voice sharpened, slicing through the air. "That woman is your wife, the mother of your unborn baby. And you sat there laughing while your mistress assaulted her." The word mistress hung in the air, vulgar and raw. Vanessa flinched. Adrian's expression darkened. For the first time, shame crept across his features, though he quickly tried to mask it with arrogance. "You're overreacting," Adrian snapped. "This is between me and my wife. Stay out of it." No, Alexander replied, his voice low but firm. It stopped being just between you and her the moment you dragged her dignity through the mud in front of all these witnesses. You humiliated her, Adrian, and by extension, you humiliated this family. The investors exchanged looks. The Carter name carried weight in every corner of the world. To stain it so publicly was dangerous, reckless. Emily swallowed hard, her heart pounding. She had always thought Alexander distant, untouchable, uninterested in her existence. But now, hearing him speak, she realized he had been watching all along, watching and silently judging the cruelty she endured. Adrian's temper flared. He stood abruptly, his glass slamming onto the table, amber liquid spilling over the polished wood. Don't you dare lecture me. You think you're better than me? Because you built a few companies and have the press eating out of your hand? You've never been married. You don't know what it's like. Alexander rose too, his towering frame dwarfing his younger brother's. The contrast between them was stark. Adrian's desperation against Alexander's unshakable composure. I may not be married, Alexander said, his voice calm but edged with steel. But I know what it means to be a man, and a man protects his family. A man doesn't abandon his wife. A man doesn't laugh while the woman carrying his child is attacked. Silence blanketed the cabin. No one dared move. The investors stared. The flight attendants stood frozen, and Emily's breath came in shallow bursts as she clutched her belly tighter. Vanessa tried to recover her composure, stepping forward with a brittle laugh. This is ridiculous. Adrian doesn't need to listen to you. He's his own man. He doesn't need his big brother telling him how to handle his marriage. Alexander turned his head slowly, fixing her with a glare so sharp she stumbled back. You don't belong here, he said coldly. You are nothing but a parasite, feeding off his weakness. This plane is for family, business, and legacy. You are none of those things. Vanessa's cheeks flushed, her lips trembling as her confidence evaporated. For once, she had no clever retort. Adrian reached for her arm, trying to steady her, but Alexander's next words cut through the cabin like a blade. Emily stays, he declared. You leave. Gasps filled the room. Vanessa stared at him in shock. What? You can't just... I can, Alexander interrupted, his voice like thunder. And I will. The Carter name has stood for power, dignity, and loyalty. You've dragged it through filth long enough. Adrian's face reddened. You can't make decisions for me. I'm not some child for you to boss around. Alexander's eyes hardened. You already proved you're no man. If you were, you wouldn't be here flaunting your mistress while your pregnant wife cries in silence. Emily's tears spilled again, but this time they were different. They weren't just tears of pain. They were tears of something new. She felt seen, protected. For years, she had endured Adrian's cruelty alone, and now someone had stood up for her in front of everyone. Her hand trembled as she brushed a tear from her cheek, whispering almost inaudibly, "Thank you." Alexander heard. His gaze flicked to her for the briefest second, softening, before returning to Adrian. "This ends tonight," he said firmly. "When we land, you and I will have a very serious conversation about consequences. But for now," his voice rose, commanding the room. "Not another word against her. Do you understand?" No one dared argue. Not Adrian, not Vanessa, not even the investors who had built their fortunes on confrontation. The cabin was heavy with tension, every breath thick with unspoken truths. Adrian slumped back into his seat, his jaw clenched, his pride wounded but his power slipping. Vanessa sat beside him, pale and shaken, her claws dulled. Emily leaned back slowly, her heart pounding, her body trembling. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't drowning alone. But beneath the fragile relief, another fear simmered. Because if Alexander had stepped in now, what else did he know? And what would happen when all the hidden truths finally came to light? Because one thing was certain, this was only the beginning of Adrian Carter's downfall. The private jet was still in the air, but it felt like the ground had already shifted beneath everyone's feet. The atmosphere was thick, suffocating, and charged with tension. Every passenger, investors, attendants, even the pilots behind the cockpit door, knew they were witnessing something they would never forget. Alexander Carter stood in the center of it all, towering over his younger brother with a calm that radiated more power than Adrian's loud arrogance ever could. His words still echoed in the silence. "This ends tonight. Emily sat quietly, her hands still trembling over her belly. Her body ached from the pull on her hair, her face burned with humiliation, but for the first time in years she felt the faint stirrings of safety. Alexander's presence was like a wall between her and the cruelty that had nearly broken her. Adrian, however, wasn't done. He leaned forward, his expression twisted with frustration. "Don't think you can humiliate me like this, Alex. You may be the so-called golden brother, the billionaire with the perfect image, but I've built my own life. You don't control me." Alexander's eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice remained even. "No, Adrian, you don't control yourself, and that's the problem." He turned slowly, deliberately, toward the investors seated nearby. "Gentlemen, you've seen it with your own eyes. This man, who claims to represent the Carter name, who sits on the board of our ventures, parades his mistress in front of you while degrading his wife, a woman carrying the next heir to our family. Do you trust a man like that to handle your money? Your contracts? Your partnerships?" The investors stiffened. None dared to speak, but their expressions betrayed unease. They had invested not just in Adrian, but in the Carter name, and now that name was tainted by his recklessness. Adrian's face went pale, then red with fury. "You wouldn't dare." "I just did." Alexander cut him off. His voice rose slightly, carrying the full weight of his authority. "I will not allow you to tarnish what generations have built. Your behavior tonight is more than a personal failure. It's a disgrace to this family, this company, and this legacy." Vanessa scoffed, crossing her arms. "Please, everyone here knows Adrian is the real charmer, not you. You hide behind your billions, but Adrian, he knows how to win people over. That's why he doesn't need your approval." Alexander's gaze snapped to her, sharp as a blade. "You mistake manipulation for charm, and you mistake greed for love. What exactly do you think Adrian has given you, Vanessa? A few dresses? A seat on this jet? Do you know what he's taken to pay for them?" Vanessa blinked, suddenly uncertain. "What are you talking about?" Alexander reached into his briefcase, which had been resting at his side. He pulled out a thin folder and tossed it onto the table with a sharp slap. Paper spilled across the polished wood. "Financial records," he said coldly. "Withdrawals, transfers, unauthorized spending accounts, all tied to Adrian Carter. Hundreds of thousands funneled into hotels, jewelry, and entertainment, most of it with your name attached." The investors leaned forward, eyes widening as they scanned the documents. Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Adrian lunged for the papers, his face contorting with panic. "Those are private. You had no right to." "I have every right," Alexander interrupted, his voice booming. "I warned you months ago, Adrian. I saw the discrepancies. I saw the reckless spending, and I gave you a chance to correct it. Instead, you doubled down. You used company money to fund your affair, to keep this woman satisfied, while your wife sat at home, pregnant, wondering where you were." The room froze. Adrian's betrayal was no longer a private sin whispered about in shadows. It was fact, laid bare under the unforgiving light of evidence. Emily gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. She had suspected Adrian of cheating, but she had never known the depth of his deceit. The money, the lies, the betrayal that went beyond their marriage and into business. Adrian's voice cracked as he tried to recover. "You don't understand, Alex. I was going to pay it back. It was temporary. Just a loan." "A loan?" Alexander barked, his composure cracking into controlled fury. "You call stealing from your own company a loan? You've put every investor at risk. You've put our family at risk." Vanessa's face drained of color. She looked at Adrian with wide, panicked eyes. "You told me it was your money. You told me." "Shut up," Adrian hissed, grabbing her arm. But she yanked it away, her voice rising in desperation. "You lied to me? You made me believe you were in control, that you could give me everything. And all this time, you were stealing?" Her shrill voice echoed through the cabin, sealing Adrian's fate. Alexander's gaze cut between them, cold and final. This is what happens when arrogance replaces responsibility, when lust replaces loyalty. "You've built your house on lies, Adrian, and tonight," he slammed the folder shut, his tone ringing with judgment, "it collapses." The cabin was utterly silent. Adrian sank back into his chair, defeated but still seething, his pride clawing at whatever scraps of dignity he had left. Vanessa sat stiffly beside him, her once smug expression replaced with fear. Emily's chest rose and fell in rapid breaths. She felt like she was watching her life unravel before her eyes. But for once, it wasn't her being torn apart. Adrian's mask had slipped, and the world finally saw him for what he was. Her eyes flicked to Alexander. Gratitude, confusion, and awe collided in her chest. He had destroyed Adrian's facade with surgical precision, and in doing so, he had given her something she thought she had lost forever, the possibility of justice. Alexander straightened, looking down at his brother one last time. When we land, the board will hear of this. You'll answer for every dollar, every lie, every humiliation you've caused. And Emily. He turned toward her, his tone softening. She deserves better. She will get better. Emily's lips parted, her throat tightening. She wanted to thank him, to tell him what his words meant, but the lump in her chest was too heavy. Instead, a single tear slipped down her cheek, glistening in the dim cabin light. And though Adrian sat only a few feet away, for the first time, Emily no longer felt like his prisoner. She felt free. What she didn't know was that freedom came at a price, and the battle was only beginning. The jet sliced through the night sky, but inside, the world was unraveling for Adrian Carter. He sat stiffly in his seat, jaw clenched, sweat beading at his temple. The confident smirk that had carried him through years of deception was gone, stripped away by Alexander's cold precision. Emily sat opposite him, still shaken, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. Her body trembled from the memory of Vanessa's attack, but her eyes, red and swollen from tears, remained fixed on Adrian. She had loved him once. She had carried his burdens, believed his promises, dreamed of their future together. But now, staring at the man before her, she realized he was a stranger. Vanessa, meanwhile, was unraveling in her own way. Her flawless exterior cracked, panic spreading across her painted features. She had built her confidence on Adrian's charm, his whispered promises, his expensive gifts. But with Alexander's revelation, those gifts had turned to ash. They weren't tokens of love. They were stolen trinkets funded by deception. "I can explain," Adrian muttered, his voice shaky but still laced with arrogance. His eyes darted toward the investors, as if appealing for sympathy. "This is being blown out of proportion. It's not what it looks like." Alexander's expression hardened. "Don't insult us further. We've seen the records. We've seen the betrayal. The question now is, what else have you been hiding?" The investors leaned forward, their eyes sharp. They were men who thrived on information, who smelled weakness like wolves circling prey. And Adrian was bleeding. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, his composure cracking. "Look, I needed the money. I was going to pay it back once the new deal's closed. Vanessa, she needed support." He gestured weakly toward her. Vanessa's head snapped toward him, her eyes flashing. "Support?" she hissed. "You told me it was your money. You told me you had everything under control. I didn't sign up to be dragged into some scandal that could destroy me." Adrian grabbed her wrist, his voice sharp. "Keep your mouth shut." She yanked her hand free, her voice rising with fury and fear. "No, Adrian, I won't. You lied to me. You made me believe I was safe with you. And now what? I'll be ruined too? Do you think I'm going to go down with you?" Her words sliced through the cabin, raw and desperate. The investors exchanged looks, some almost smirking at the implosion happening before them. Alexander stood silent, letting the chaos expose more than he ever could with words. Emily's heart pounded. Each confession was like a stone dropping into her chest. She had endured his cruelty, his neglect, his betrayal. But hearing it spoken aloud, hearing Vanessa admit the lies, there was no denying the truth anymore. "You told me," Vanessa continued, her voice trembling, "that your brother was jealous of you, that you were the real brains of the family, that soon you'd have more than him. You said I'd be by your side when it happened. Was that a lie too?" Adrian's face twisted with rage. "Don't twist this, Vanessa. I gave you everything." "You gave me nothing but borrowed luxury," she snapped back. "You promised me power, stability. Instead, you gave me scraps paid for with stolen money. Do you know what happens to women tied to scandals like this? We're discarded, forgotten. I won't let you drag me down." Her words rang with desperation, but beneath the panic was truth. Vanessa was a survivor, and she could see Adrian's ship sinking. Alexander finally stepped forward, his voice like steel. "You see, Adrian? Even she sees what you've become. You used her, just as you've used everyone else. Emily, this family, our name, even the people who trusted you with their investments. And now the mask is gone. Adrian's breathing was ragged, his eyes darting between Vanessa, Emily, and his brother. "You can't do this to me. You can't all turn against me." Emily's lips parted, her voice breaking the silence. It was the first time she had spoken since the assault. "You already did this to yourself, Adrian." Her words were soft, trembling, but they carried more weight than any accusation. The entire cabin stilled, listening. Emily's eyes shimmered with tears, but her voice grew stronger. "I begged you to love me. I begged you to see our baby, but you didn't care. You chose her. You chose your pride. And now the whole world knows what you are." Adrian flinched as though struck. For a moment he looked almost human, haunted, broken. But the flash of vulnerability vanished quickly, replaced by anger. "You think you're better than me, Emily? You think anyone will believe you without me? You're nothing without this family name." Alexander's voice cut like a whip. "You're wrong, Adrian. She is everything this family should stand for. Loyalty, dignity, resilience. And you're the one who has nothing." Vanessa's laugh was sharp, bitter. "He's right. You're finished, Adrian. And I'm not going down with you. I'll find someone who can actually keep his promises." Adrian stared at her in disbelief, betrayal flashing across his face. You're leaving me?" Vanessa shrugged, her voice dripping with contempt. "You've got nothing left to offer. Why would I stay?" The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Adrian, the man who had once strutted with arrogance, now sat crumbling in his seat. His mistress had turned on him. His wife had spoken against him. His brother had destroyed his facade. Emily exhaled shakily, a tear slipping down her cheek. For so long powerless, voiceless. But tonight, Adrian's betrayal had been dragged into the light for all to see. And in that light, she felt something stir inside her, a strength she thought she had lost. Alexander straightened, his voice final. "When we land, this will go further. The board will hear. The press will hear. And Adrian, your downfall will be public." Adrian's shoulders slumped, his head hanging low. He had built his world on lies, and now that world was collapsing around him. Emily closed her eyes, her hand pressing to her stomach. For the first time in months, she whispered to her baby, "We're going to be okay." And though her heart still ached, she believed it. But what she didn't realize yet was that this exposure was only the first step, because the real fight for her dignity was still to come. The jet hummed steadily as it cut through the dark night sky, but for Emily, the world had gone silent. The shouting, the accusations, Vanessa's shrill betrayal, Adrian's panicked defenses, all of it blurred into a distant echo. She sat slumped against the leather seat, her trembling hands pressed protectively over her belly. Her body ached, not just from the violent tug on her hair, but from the weight of everything that had been ripped open. She had tried to hold herself together, to endure the humiliation quietly as she always had. But now, with the truth exposed, with Adrian's mask shattered, she felt like the floor had been pulled from under her feet. Her chest heaved as tears spilled freely, unstoppable now. She didn't care who saw. Not the investors, not Vanessa, not even Adrian. The pain was too great to hide. She turned her face toward the oval window, where the stars blinked cold and distant against the endless black. She whispered so faintly only her baby could hear, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you have to feel all this with me." Memories flooded her like a dam breaking. She saw herself at 22, the hopeful girl who had fallen in love with Adrian's charm. He had swept her off her feet with grand gestures and promises of forever. She remembered the way her heart had raced when he first took her hand at the gala where they met, whispering, "You're different. You're the one I've been waiting for." She remembered the wedding, lavish, sparkling, a storybook dream. Her parents had cried tears of joy, believing she was marrying into security and love. She had believed it too. She had walked down the aisle with hope in her chest and stars in her eyes, never imagining that those stars would one day turn to ashes. She remembered the sacrifices, how she had given up her career to support his, how she had traded her own dreams for his ambitions. She had believed in him when no one else did, had stood by him when investors laughed at his early failures. She had been his anchor, his confidant, his biggest believer. And this was her reward, sitting humiliated on a jet while he flaunted another woman. Her sobs deepened, her body curling forward, her belly pressed tight against her thighs as she hugged herself, rocking gently as though trying to soothe her own broken heart. The baby kicked, and it only made the ache sharper. "You deserve a better father," she whispered through the tears. "You deserve better than this." The cabin was quieter now. The investors exchanged uneasy glances, uncomfortable with the raw display of pain before them. Vanessa sat stiffly, her lips pressed thin, her confidence shattered. Adrian sat hunched, seething silently, his eyes fixed on the floor. Only Alexander watched Emily closely, his jaw tight, his fists clenching at his sides. "Emily," he said softly, his voice steady but not cold. "You don't have to carry this weight alone anymore." She shook her head, unable to meet his eyes. "But I already did. For years, I gave him everything I had, and now there's nothing left of me." Her voice cracked, the words spilling out like broken glass. "Do you know what it feels like to be invisible? To live in a house full of gold and marble but feel like a ghost? To watch the man you love look at you like you're a burden instead of his partner?" Her tears blurred her vision, her voice trembling with anguish. "I begged him to see me, to love me, and all I got was silence, or worse, cruelty." Her confession pierced the cabin. It wasn't just pain, it was the sound of years of suffering finally breaking free. The investors shifted awkwardly, some lowering their eyes. Even Vanessa, for all her arrogance, looked away. Adrian finally spoke, his tone sharp, defensive. "You think you're some kind of victim? You had everything. The house, the money, the name. Do you know how many women would kill to have what you had?" Emily's head snapped toward him, her face streaked with tears but her eyes blazing with fury. "None of it mattered without love, Adrian. None of it. What good is a mansion if it feels like a prison? What good is money if it comes with betrayal? You broke me. You broke us." Her voice cracked on the last word and she collapsed back against the seat, her sobs returning with a vengeance. Alexander's hands tightened on the edge of the table, his face a mask of restrained rage. He wanted to shout at his brother, to drag him across the floor and force him to look at the woman he had destroyed. But he knew this wasn't his moment. It was Emily's, and she was finally letting the truth out. Her mind spun further back, to the lonely nights in their penthouse when Adrian never came home, to the faint perfume lingering on his shirts, the lipstick stains she tried to pretend she didn't see, to the endless waiting, the excuses, the gaslighting that made her question her own sanity. She remembered standing in the nursery one night, staring at the tiny crib she had decorated alone. She had whispered to her unborn baby, "Maybe he'll come around when you're here. Maybe you'll remind him of love." But tonight had proven otherwise. Her voice broke again as she whispered into the silence of the cabin, "I don't know how much more I can take." The baby kicked again, stronger this time, as though answering her. Emily pressed both hands over her belly, tears dripping down her chin. "I have to be strong for you, but I don't know if I can." For a moment the only sound was her sobbing and the steady hum of the engines. Then, slowly, Alexander moved. He crossed the aisle, lowering himself to her level. His voice was low, steady, meant only for her. "You can," he said. "You're stronger than you think, and you're not alone anymore." Emily looked up at him, her tear-stained face filled with doubt. "But what if I am? What if when this plane lands I have nowhere to go?" Alexander's gaze didn't waver. "Then you come to me. You'll have protection. You'll have a place. You'll have the chance to rebuild." Her lips trembled, fresh tears spilling down. "Why? Why would you help me?" His eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. "Because you deserve it. And because my brother doesn't get to be the end of your story." Emily stared at him, her heart pounding. His words wrapped around her like a lifeline thrown into stormy seas. And though her body still trembled, though her grief was still raw, something inside her shifted. It was small, fragile, but undeniable. A spark. For the first time in a long time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over. But as the night stretched on and the jet sped closer to its destination, she didn't yet know that her collapse tonight would become the foundation of her greatest rise. The cabin of the jet felt heavy, filled with the weight of unshed tears and the ruins of a marriage. Emily sat back against her seat, drained from her breakdown. Her eyes were swollen, her voice hoarse, but her hands never left her belly. She whispered to her child as though the tiny life inside her was the only anchor keeping her afloat. Across from her, Adrian sulked in bitter silence, his pride in tatters. His mistress had turned against him. His brother had humiliated him, and his wife, his once quiet, submissive wife, had finally spoken with a strength that cut through his arrogance. He couldn't control the narrative anymore, and it terrified him. But Alexander Carter wasn't finished. He stood at the center of the cabin, broad shoulders squared, his commanding presence demanding attention. When he spoke, his voice was measured, steady, but every word carried the weight of a hammer falling. "Emily," he said, turning his gaze to her. "There's something you need to know, something I should have told you a long time ago." Her brows furrowed. She looked at him with confusion, her lips parting. "What do you mean?" Adrian scoffed, trying to recover a shred of control. "Don't listen to him, Emily. He's just trying to turn you against me. He's always envied me, always tried to steal what's mine." Alexander's glare shut him down instantly. "You stole from yourself, Adrian, and you've lost everything because of it. But Emily," he softened his tone as he returned his gaze to her, "you've had more power than you realize all along." Emily blinked, shaking her head. "I don't understand." Alexander reached into his briefcase again, pulling out another folder, this one bound with a gold seal. He laid it on the table between them. "This is Father's will, the one you were never shown." The cabin fell utterly silent. Adrian's face drained of color, his eyes widening in shock. "You wouldn't," he hissed. "I would," Alexander replied coldly. "And I am." Emily hesitated before reaching forward with trembling hands. She opened the folder, her eyes scanning the elegant script. And then she saw it, her own name written in black ink right alongside Alexander's. Her breath caught. "What is this?" "It's the truth," Alexander said firmly. "When you married Adrian, Father updated the will. He saw you as part of this family, not just as Adrian's wife, but as someone who embodied the values he wanted the Carter name to carry forward. Loyalty, integrity, strength. You were added as a beneficiary, not Adrian, you." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. Her vision blurred as she reread the words again and again, unable to believe them. All this time, she had thought she was powerless, a burden, an afterthought. But here it was in writing. She wasn't nothing. She was an heir to the empire. Adrian shot up from his seat, fury boiling over. "Lies. She doesn't deserve it. She's nothing but a charity case. Father never would have." "He did," Alexander cut in, his voice sharp. "And deep down you know why. He saw through you, Adrian. He knew you lacked the discipline, the character, the strength to lead, so he safeguarded the family's future. Emily was his choice, not you." Gasps rippled through the investors. Vanessa stared wide-eyed, her jaws slack. Even the attendants froze, the revelation sending shockwaves through the cabin. Emily pressed a hand to her chest, her heart racing. I don't know what to say." Alexander stepped closer, his tone softening. "You don't have to say anything, but you need to understand. You are not powerless. You've never been. Adrian tried to strip you of your dignity, but he can't take away who you are. And now you have the legal right to protect yourself and your child." Her lips trembled as fresh tears filled her eyes. Not tears of despair this time, but of disbelief, of overwhelming relief. For so long she had lived in shadows, convinced she had no voice, no strength. And now, suddenly, the truth illuminated everything. Adrian's voice cracked with desperation. "Emily, listen to me. Don't let him twist this. You're my wife. We're supposed to be a team. You can't side with him. You can't destroy me." Emily turned to him slowly, her tears still falling. But when she spoke, her voice carried a quiet strength that startled even herself. "You destroyed yourself, Adrian, and you destroyed us. I begged you for love, for respect, and you gave me betrayal. You don't get to ask for loyalty now." Her words struck harder than any blow. Adrian staggered back, his face crumbling. For the first time he looked small, weak, defeated. Vanessa leaned forward, her smirk returning in a twisted form. "So, she has the money? The power. Looks like you really are finished, Adrian." She laughed cruelly, but the sound rang hollow. Even she seemed shaken by the revelation. Emily ignored her. For the first time, she wasn't looking at Vanessa. She wasn't looking at Adrian. She was looking at herself, at the strength she had forgotten, at the resilience buried beneath years of pain. Her hand rested firmly on her belly as she whispered, "We're going to be okay. Mama's not weak anymore." Alexander inclined his head slightly, a rare softness flickering in his eyes. "That's the truth Father saw in you, and now the world will see it too." Emily closed the folder, her fingers trembling but resolute. She looked at Adrian one last time, her voice calm but final. When this plane lands, I'm filing for divorce. And this time, you won't take anything from me. Not my child, not my dignity, not my future." Adrian sank back into his chair, his shoulders collapsing under the weight of defeat. The mighty facade he had built for years was gone, and in its place was nothing but a broken man. The jet hummed on, but inside the cabin, a new energy filled the air. Emily wasn't just surviving anymore, she was beginning to rise. And no one, not Adrian, not Vanessa, not even her own fears, could stop what was coming next. The roar of the jet's engines eventually softened into silence as the plane touched down in Paris. But inside Emily Carter's heart, a new fire had begun to roar, louder than any machine. She stepped onto the tarmac with trembling legs, her body still bearing the weight of humiliation, betrayal, and heartbreak, but also something else. Determination. For the first time since her wedding day, she no longer clung to Adrian's shadow. She no longer felt chained to his choices or his cruelty. The revelation of her place in the Carter will had cracked open a door she never knew existed. And through it, she glimpsed a version of herself she had almost forgotten. A woman who could stand tall, who could fight back, who could protect not only herself but her child. Alexander stayed close but gave her space. He didn't hover, didn't crowd her. Instead, he offered quiet guidance. "Tomorrow, you'll meet with the family's attorneys in Paris," he explained as their convoy of black cars pulled away from the airport. "They'll confirm everything I showed you on the jet. You'll see for yourself that the power is yours now. But Emily, power means nothing unless you use it." She nodded, her hands resting on her belly. "I don't know if I'm ready." Alexander's sharp gaze softened. "You weren't ready for betrayal either, but you survived it, and now you'll do more than survive. You'll rise." The words echoed in her mind long after they arrived at the hotel, a 5-star monument of glass and marble, the kind of place where billionaires conducted quiet wars behind closed doors. Emily followed a staff member to her suite, but when she opened the gilded doors, she froze. The room wasn't just luxurious, it was prepared. On one side, a row of designer dresses hung in shades of power. Deep reds, emerald greens, midnight blacks. On the vanity, carefully arranged makeup and jewelry gleamed under the lights. And beside the bed, a note in Alexander's hand. "You are stronger than you know. Wear it. Show it." Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the bed, tears threatening to spill. No one had ever given her tools to rise before. For years, she had been told to shrink, to submit, to stay quiet. And now here was proof that someone believed in her potential. That night, Emily barely slept. Her dreams were restless, filled with echoes of Adrian's cruelty, Vanessa's laughter, and Alexander's steady voice. By dawn, she rose with a decision. She would no longer be the woman hiding in the corner, clutching her stomach in silence. She would become someone her child could look up to. The transformation began slowly. The first step was physical. She stood before the mirror, staring at her pale reflection. Her hair was tangled, her skin blotched from crying. She looked broken. But as she let the stylist Alexander had arranged step in, something shifted. Hours passed in a blur of curling irons, brushes, and powders. When it was over, Emily hardly recognized herself. Her hair cascaded in soft waves, framing her face with elegance. Her eyes shone, no longer dulled by pain, but sharpened by resolve. The swelling around her cheeks had faded, replaced with a glow that spoke not of wealth, but of resilience. The second step was clothing. She slipped into a dark green gown that hugged her curves modestly but powerfully, the fabric flowing like strength itself. Around her neck she fastened a simple but striking diamond pendant, a gift from the Carter estate she had once tucked away in shame, believing she didn't deserve it. Now it rested against her heart like armor. The third step was internal. She stood before the mirror again, her hands resting on her stomach. "We're not weak anymore," she whispered to her unborn child. "We're not his victims, we're survivors, fighters, and tomorrow we'll show the world." When she stepped out of the suite that evening, even Alexander paused. For a moment, his carefully composed expression softened into something almost like awe. "You look," he began, then stopped himself. Instead, he simply nodded. "You look ready." Emily smiled faintly, a mix of nerves and determination curling in her chest. "I don't feel ready, but maybe that's the point. I've been waiting for Adrian to give me strength. Now I see. I had it all along." They spent the evening in preparation. Alexander coached her on what was to come. A gala hosted by one of the Carter family's closest business partners, where Adrian was expected to appear and spin his downfall as mere gossip. Emily would attend, not as a silent wife, but as the woman with the will, the truth, and the strength to shatter his lies. She practiced standing tall, speaking clearly, looking directly into the eyes of those who doubted her. Each time she stumbled, Alexander reminded her, "Don't think of Adrian. Think of your child. Protecting your child is protecting yourself." By midnight, Emily collapsed into bed exhausted, but this time, her exhaustion carried purpose. She dreamed not of betrayal, but of standing in the light, unafraid. The next morning, she woke with a calm clarity. The fear was still there. Fear of Adrian's rage, fear of public whispers, fear of stumbling in for the powerful men and women who would judge her. But beneath that fear was a steel she hadn't felt before. She dressed deliberately, choosing a gown of deep crimson, red for survival, red for power, red for the blood she had shed in silence, now transformed into strength. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she walked, each step louder, more certain. Alexander met her at the entrance, offering his arm. "Tonight," he said, "they'll all see the truth, not just about Adrian, but about you." Emily placed her hand on his arm, steadying herself. "Then let's make sure they never forget it." The convoy carried them to the gala, where chandeliers glittered and cameras flashed. The moment Emily stepped into the grand hall, whispers rippled across the crowd. People expected her to arrive broken, humiliated, invisible. Instead, they saw a woman transformed, strong, radiant, unbowed. Adrian, already inside with Vanessa clinging to his side, froze mid-laugh when he spotted her. His smirk faltered, his glass nearly slipping from his hand. For the first time, he looked like the one who didn't belong. Emily met his gaze, unflinching. She walked forward, every step measured, every breath steady. She wasn't his shadow anymore. She wasn't his victim. She was the storm coming to claim justice. And as the crowd turned to watch, the stage was set for the public reckoning Adrian Carter had feared all along. The grand hall shimmered with chandeliers, a cathedral of wealth and influence where reputations were made or shattered in a single night. The gala was supposed to be Adrian Carter's chance to recover, to charm investors and dismiss the whispers that had begun swirling around him. But when Emily stepped into the room, glowing in crimson, her chin high, her step steady, the night became something else entirely. Every head turned, every whisper sharpened. People had expected a broken woman, hiding from humiliation. Instead, they saw power wrapped in grace, pain transformed into strength. Alexander walked beside her like a shadow of steel, his presence silent but commanding. But it was Emily who drew the eyes, who held the room in a way Adrian never truly had. Adrian's glass trembled in his hand as he watched her cross the hall. Vanessa clung to his arm, her nails digging into his sleeve, her forced smile betraying unease. He tried to regain his composure, raising his voice with false bravado. Well, look who decided to show up. Emily, you're full of surprises." Emily stopped a few feet away, her eyes locking onto his. Her voice, calm and clear, carried across the room. "You're right, Adrian, I am full of surprises. But tonight, you'll be the one surprised." The crowd murmured. Alexander stepped slightly aside, giving her the stage. For years she had been the silent wife, but tonight was hers. Emily lifted a folder from her clutch, the same folder Alexander had shown her on the jet. She held it up, her voice steady. "This is my name in the Carter will. The one your father updated when we married. He believed in loyalty, in dignity, in strength, and he entrusted me with the future of this family. Not you." Gasps rippled through the hall. Cameras flashed. Investors leaned forward, hungry for the spectacle. Adrian's face turned red, his smirk collapsing. "That's a lie," he shouted, his voice cracking. "She's nothing without me." Emily stepped closer, her heels clicking like a judge's gavel. "Nothing without you?" Her eyes glistened with controlled fury. "I gave up everything for you. My career, my dreams, my dignity. And in return, you gave me betrayal. You laughed while your mistress pulled my hair on a plane filled with investors. You stole from your own company to fund your affair. And you dare stand here and call me nothing?" The room fell silent, all eyes locked on her. Even Vanessa froze, her grip on Adrian's arm loosening. Alexander's voice rang out from the side, deep and commanding. "She speaks the truth. The documents are verified. The board has already been notified. Adrian Carter's time is over. Adrian's world crumbled before the crowd. Investors exchanged glances, their expressions turning cold, calculating. They weren't looking at a leader anymore. They were looking at a liability. Vanessa, sensing the shift, stepped away from Adrian, her voice sharp. You told me you were in control. You told me none of this would touch us. But you're finished, Adrian. I won't go down with you. She tossed her glass onto the table, the champagne spilling like wasted promises, and stalked away under the glare of cameras. Adrian reached out desperately. Vanessa, don't you dare. But she was gone, leaving him alone. Emily's heart pounded, but she stood tall. The crowd wasn't just witnessing Adrian's downfall. They were witnessing her rebirth. She raised her chin, her voice steady though her eyes brimmed with tears. For years, I let myself believe I was weak, that I had to stay silent, that I had to endure. But tonight, I stand here to remind every woman in this room, silence is not strength, enduring cruelty is not loyalty, and love does not mean losing yourself. The hall erupted in applause, sharp and thunderous. Some clapped cautiously, others passionately. But together they built a storm of approval that drowned out Adrian's sputtering protests. He stumbled forward, his voice breaking. You'll regret this, Emily. You'll regret turning against me. Alexander stepped in, his presence like a wall. No, Adrian. The only regret here is yours. You had everything. A loyal wife, a future child, a place in this family, and you threw it all away. Two board members approached, flanking Adrian. One spoke firmly. You're done, Carter. Effective immediately. Your shares are frozen. Your seat on the board is revoked. Security will escort you out. Adrian's face twisted with rage and disbelief. You can't do this. This is my legacy. No, Emily said softly, her voice carrying more power than his shouts. This was your prison. My legacy begins tonight. The guard seized his arms, pulling him toward the exit. Cameras flashed wildly, capturing every second of the spectacle. Adrian fought, cursed, but it was useless. His downfall was public, brutal, and complete. As the doors closed behind him, silence lingered for a beat before giving way to applause once more. Applause for Emily. She stood still, her chest rising and falling with emotion. Tears slid down her cheeks, but they were no longer the tears of a broken woman. They were the tears of release, of victory, of catharsis. She pressed a hand to her belly, whispering through the roar of the crowd, We're free, my love. We're finally free. Alexander approached, his voice low but proud. You did it. You didn't just survive, you conquered. Emily turned to him, her lips trembling into a faint smile. I didn't do it alone. For a moment, the hall seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them standing in the glow of triumph. Emily wasn't naive. Her journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges, still whispers, still wounds to heal. But tonight, she had proven something to herself and to the world. She was no longer defined by Adrian Carter's cruelty. She was Emily Carter, stronger, wiser, unbreakable. As the applause swelled, Alexander leaned close enough for only her to hear. Father was right. You are the future of this family, and I'll stand beside you to make sure no one ever takes that from you again. Emily nodded, her tears shining in the chandelier light. She looked out at the sea of faces, no longer afraid of their judgment. She had faced betrayal, humiliation, despair, and she had risen. The night had begun as Adrian's chance at redemption. It ended as Emily's coronation. And as the cameras captured her standing tall in crimson, her hand on her belly, the world would remember this night as the moment a broken wife became unstoppable. So my wonderful friends, that's how this story comes to a close. If you're still here with me until now, it means something in Emily's journey touched your heart too. Life always tests us, but as Marcus Aurelius said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Just like Emily, we can all rise from betrayal, find healing, and protect our dignity. If this story moved you, please like this video, share it with someone who might need hope, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so we can keep walking through these powerful journeys together.